Hi, everyone. Let's make a start. Welcome to the webinar, the magic ITAM formula for navigating Oracle Java licensing. And of course, it being the week of Halloween, this is all about no tricks, just treats. Joining me today is my esteemed colleague from one of my partners. First of all, I'll introduce myself. I am Simon Taylor. I'm Vice President of all our global partners at Azul. It's a big part of our business, working with the different amount of partners that we have in our ecosystem. And one of those is Peter. Peter, if you want to introduce yourself, that would be great.
Absolutely. Thank you, Simon. And hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Peter Simeonov. I'm the founder and CEO of Smart Migrator. We are an innovator developing a unique platform to automate cloud migration and management and provide all the associated services to help organizations on their journey to the cloud. And today we're specifically focusing on Java, which is always an integral aspect.
Thank you, Peter. Now, this webinar today, for those that are joining, maybe have joined a few other of our webinars at Azul, we're focusing specifically on really what the blueprint is to manage this process, not so much the issues around licensing with Oracle, because we know there's such a big issue in the market. We're going to touch on that briefly. But this webinar is very much around the practical side of taking the conversation from an ITAM, IT asset management, software asset management type conversation into something more practical so you can address it and giving you a blueprint for success. So hopefully this will be valuable. That's why I asked Peter to join us today so that we could get into more of the specifics of his experience managing that. But before we do that, let's just do some usual things that I talk about, which is talking about Java. Now, Java itself, for those that aren't aware, it's a programming language. It's been around for a long time, over 30 years. It's probably the fastest programming language and consistently used in a lot of business applications. It's a little bit different because it runs compiled inside a virtual machine, which means that you can take the code that was written maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago, and you can port it to a new version of Java or a new virtual machine framework that's called a JDK, Java Development Kit, but it's a runtime that Java runs within. And of course, for those that know Java, Oracle acquired Java or the assets of Java and has been providing that for some time. And of course, in recent years, has been monetizing that as well. So part of the issue we see in the market today and what's most compelling is the fact that the continued monetization and cost increase associated with managing something or using something, I should say, that was free before. So Java used to be free. It was open source. It still is open source. But at the same time, in around 2017, Oracle slowly started to charge for Java releases and Java support, particularly older Java releases. Newer ones have a period of time when they aren't charged for. And then consistently from 2021 to now 2023, in January, monetizing this dramatically. The biggest change came in January 23, when Oracle decided to change the licensing model from infrastructure, so that was like desktops and cores, to employees. And they did that for a very specific reason we're going to talk about in a minute. But this has really been the big issue in the industry because Oracle has stated a few times that they're trying to turn this Java in revenue into a $3 or $4 billion market for them. So as a result, there are a lot of customers with hefty price tags right now in terms of bills. Now, what do those bills look like? Well, if you are a fee-paying Oracle customer today, and you were originally paying for your use of Java on a infrastructure basis, and now you've got a large number of employees, you're probably a bit worried because even if you have one small Java application and 10,000 employees, Oracle's going to give you a bill based on 10,000 employees, not the small Java estate that you have, unless you can manage and negotiate within the framework of your existing contract. So these are for fee-paying Java customers out today. That's one type of customer that sits in the industry today. The second type of customer are the ones that have still been using Java for many years, are still using it supposedly for free, don't want to pay for it, have been getting away with it, and have been, for instance, downloading Oracle updates. And now under the employee model, Oracle can just, from a proof of a download, give you a bill. And there are many organizations in this space that are very worried. The third scenario of customers is those who really have no idea what's going on. So they may be using big Java application technologies, and they don't even know there's an Oracle licensing requirement. And good examples of that are things like Kafka, Cassandra, Cloudera, Solr, Apache, all these open source frameworks. They all use Java, and the Java is licensable. Peter, I don't know if you've got any other thoughts and comments on this, but I know we were talking about this before, and you think that's a big group of customers, right?
It is a big group, and we've come time and time again across the same issue. A lot of companies have difficulty getting full visibility across their IT estate, and in the context of Java, there are applications that come bundled with Java. So unless it's all documented properly, it comes down to IT asset management processes. But unless it's documented properly, there's a lot of applications that can be missed, and that can come to bring a lot of problems later with Oracle. And that's why we will talk about this in a moment, but that's why it's so important to really get proper documentation around the assets, the applications, and what Java is across the entire organization.
Yeah, and a good example is there are many legacy applications that sit in old versions of Java that are sitting in environments like desktops and some server environments that people don't realize need support for. Maybe they're in a critical infrastructure type industry, or something that's mandated compliance from a support point of view, and they're just sitting there unsupported or out of compliance, which is a big issue, particularly if you get audited and you're in a very highly profile sector. So let's talk a little bit more about some other common questions we get before we get into the framework moving forward. So how does Oracle know that you have Java? Well, they have a big mechanism for just tracking everything. IP addresses of computers that download Java. The Java downloads themselves when you run them or auto update. They phone home and they tell Oracle what they just did. Specifically, the features that are enabled around a call home feature. So if you do a new update, it calls back to Oracle and says, yeah, look, I've installed myself. And many of those installs as well, albeit might be initial free versions of Java, because they're configured to auto update, they automatically download the security patch that is chargeable. So very clever ways to lock you into a licensing framework, which is slightly challenging for most organizations. So really, this comes down to, and this is the real meat of the conversation today, really, which is what are your options and how do you manage this, just to give people a bit of perspective. And of course, the first one is you can ignore everything. You could just say, you know what, Oracle, you can go and pound sand. I don't really care too much about what you do. You can't audit me. I'm not going to give you any information. Trouble is, Oracle's getting much more aggressive right now. And I think the days of ignoring this scenario are gone, really, when you can get a bill just from your employee count. Secondly, you can try and negotiate. You can really negotiate if you're coming from a position of strength. In other words, you've been paying, you've got a regular cadence with the Oracle team, and you can try and negotiate within your existing contract framework. Very few customers fit into that model. Third scenario is you could just surrender. And I put the analogy here that, surrendering basically means hands up, I've been using Java. You hand over data. That's the worst possible thing you can do. But if you hand over data, then obviously Oracle now can go back and say, hey, okay, here's your bill. And often what happens is they go back and say, right, you owe us to the last 5 years because you've been using us since 2019. But so unless you sign up for another 5-year contract, you're going to owe us for that period, both periods of time. And if you sign up for a new 5-year period, then maybe we'll forget about the old 5 years. But there are lots of nuances to this. For example, unless Oracle really does truly know what you've been using for the past 5 years, it's very hard to create that model and stick with it, particularly if they go with the employee count, because the employee count model has only been around since January 2023. So they can't exactly claim a licensing framework from 2019, for example, based on employee count, because it didn't actually exist then. The last one before we get to the switch is removing Java. Now, this is very hard to do because most business applications today are written in Java and maintained in Java for a reason, because it's high performance. So for those of you who are familiar with other languages like Python and C++, they're a bit easier, Python particularly to learn, but they're still not as fast as Java. So when anybody is running business applications like trading platforms, financial systems, things to do with maybe life sciences, stuff to do drug development where you need vast amounts of throughput and data processing, big data, for example, you're going to use Java, and it's quite hard to move away from that. So removal isn't usually an option unless you've got a very small footprint and you know where it is. The last one is switching, and with switching, there's some considerations that we're going to get into today, but this is really where I'm looking for Peter to help with some of his expertise, and we'll talk a little bit more around the framework for that in a second. So before we do that, let's just pick up on two scenarios. The first one being, before switching, let's just say I'm in one of those other 4 scenarios and I'm going to stay and pay. Okay, let's just talk about, I'm going to build out this slide with some questions here. Things that you need to consider, certainly from the Oracle sales team side. One, how to deal with Oracle sales teams as they threaten audits, and 2, what the license management teams really do mean inside of Oracle. So Peter, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but certainly, I've got a few from previous conversations on these types of webinars as well.
Certainly. So a lot of companies are aware and afraid of the Oracle audits, but in essence, it's all about sales. What Oracle's trying to do is lock organizations into, especially focusing on the newer billing model, and lock them for as long periods as possible. The tactics around this are questionable, but in essence, when they get in touch, they're trying to get data, visibility across what, as an organization, you're using, and also trying to lock you into a period of time on a new contract. It's today, in this day and age, everybody's trying to move away from vendor lock-in. It's a major problem, not just with Java, but across other aspects of IT. And generally, we tend to advise, look at the options. Look at the alternatives, because it's very easy to just stay and accept the pricing changes as a cost of business. We see also that it very much depends on how organizations are run. Some organizations are more proactive than others and are actively exploring options to improve and reduce costs. But for others, it tends to bring a lot of pressure from the operational units, because they're used to things as they are. And we actively try to encourage organizations to be proactive and people to be proactive and look at options, because the easiest thing is just to stay and pay.
Yeah. So the question is just, you can stick with the status quo, which is the more expensive option, and in many cases will create even more lock-in now, particularly with the way the licensing model's working. Or it's a good opportunity to look and say, okay, what is the best strategy, right? And that's really what we sort of want to talk about here.
And also, to add to this, in relation to Java, it's very easy to switch to an OpenJDK as an alternative to Oracle. That is not the case with many other systems. So it really pays to look for an alternative that provides equal or superior benefits to Oracle Java, but comes with a considerable reduction in cost. It's really worth exploring it.
Excellent. So before we move on, just a quick word particularly for the people who are joining for the rest of this webinar. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them into the chat. I think the previous slides are very much around, the background here, but as we get into the sort of blueprint of success here and the things you should think about, it might jog your mind a little bit more to the questioning that we can go and address for you at the end. So to go to Peter's point, the great migration, as we like to call it, and in the background here, you'll see my research here, is happening. People are moving away from Oracle Java, and they're moving away in quite large numbers. At least half to 2/3 of the people that we surveyed, are particularly in this particular survey, which is actually conducted by a third party. So it was over 2,500 respondents to this, are moving, and they're moving with ease. It's not difficult. And the reason why I highlight this is because there is a general conception in the market, particularly by Oracle, that migrations are hard. They're not. They're very easy. JDK, as I mentioned, is like that car scenario where you've got the Java code that runs, and that's the engine in a car, perhaps, and you can change the outside of the car very quickly by just using different models. So that's as easy as it is. It's more configuration to move to a different type of JDK. So you can save money and move and create a different view on your Java use and management very quickly. It's just more there's a willingness to understand how to do that. And a good way of thinking about this is we call this, within my sort of channel environment at Zool, for example, we call this Power 3. So whenever we come into a scenario where a customer's sort of struggling a little bit to understand how to deal with this, well, we're a vendor. I work for a vendor with Azul, but at the same time, we realize that you need some expertise here, and you maybe don't have it in-house. So we think there's three groups of individuals that help, or disciplines rather, that will help you make this decision more quickly. First, you need a SAM ITAM specialist. You need somebody that will help you understand your license risk. Second, you need somebody that will understand how to do the migration and what that looks like. So you can really start to understand, okay, what's the effort moving? It could be very quick. It could be a little bit more complex. Most of the time, you can still do it in a few weeks or maybe a couple of months. And then you need a best-in-class JDK vendor that will level up and improve your overall support as it relates to Java. Because what many people don't realize is certainly old versions of Java, there's only one or two, perhaps even one OpenJDK vendor that will support things like Java 6 and 7. So you may have been running for years paying Oracle but your primary applications are 6 and 7, and really Oracle doesn't support 6 and 7. So you're really out of compliance anyway, particularly if you're in a regulated industry and you needed to have paid support, or you needed security updates, for example, for critical infrastructure mandates. So this Power 3 combination is very important. Now, the particular process that people go through as it relates to these three groups, it typically starts with that independent SAM ITAM specialist doing a Java discovery. Sometimes they use a tool to go and gather the data, but coming up with a process to go and discover where Java is being used and then create a set of validation findings. Those validation findings often are presented by another third party, maybe a value-added reseller, maybe somebody that works with the vendors like we have in our network. And then paired very quickly with somebody that knows how to do the migration. And that person that knows how to do the migration will help you size and understand the effort. In many cases, it can be very quick, just like weekend, for example, if it's desktops, for example, or if it's servers and maybe a little bit more complex because you have different applications, different critical priorities. You can't necessarily just quickly reconfigure because of downtime. It needs to be sequenced, very much a project management effort. And then into the effort itself, who's going to do that, whether you can do it yourself or not. So there are some considerations here. And really, this is where I wanted to bring Peter in a lot more into the conversation, because Peter, you've probably got some thoughts about what is best practice, particularly in switching and saving. I think this is a good segue into maybe you thinking about it, sharing some of your experiences.
Certainly, Simon. I think in general, across migrations that not beyond Java, the process is quite similar, but the biggest and the most important part of the process is the assessment, the initial assessment, discovering all the assets, classifying them, and planning the migration correctly. That's where a lot of the time of the whole project ends up being, and also a lot of the effort that's required, and also where most of the mistakes happen, which cause problems later. So it's really important to, comes back from the point that I mentioned a while ago. It comes back to really having proper documentation, really doing as much as possible from your organizational side to document and understand all the assets, or classifying all the applications and the Java versions, because this will help whether you are implementing the migration in-house or working with a third-party specialist like Smart Migrator. It will save time, it will save cost. It's really important to realize also the migration as part of your overall organizational strategy and digital transformation strategy in particular. We quite often see questions around Java, but they're part of an overall transformational program. And also, especially in relation to transitioning to cloud, there's a lot that goes along with that in terms of preparing the organization, but also in terms of planning and aligning it with the strategic goals of the organization. And that's where it pays to have an external expert involved who understands the opportunities and can help you derive the most value of the migration. Java is much more straightforward than other migrations, but there are pitfalls to beware. And also from our experience, we see time and time again organizations who trying to implement migrations in-house and end up going into problems, or the projects tends to take a lot longer than anticipated compared to working with a specialist from the start. Quite often the decision is down to cost, in some cases risk as well. But when we talk about cost, it's very important to realize also the whole cost spectrum. So performing the migration in-house would mean saving the cost of having an external migration consultancy. But the people that you allocate from within your team to perform the migration, there's an opportunity cost because they're not doing their jobs whilst they're performing the migrations. And that has an added cost, which has to be factored in. The duration of the project. We see projects where we've been brought in to remediate problems that have taken more than double what they would have taken if we had been involved in from the start. So it's worth looking at all these considerations and consider whether it's a better step to do it in-house or if it's worth engaging external help. A lot of organizations prefer to outsource the risk and look at the whole picture and the value proposition and work with an expert from the start. But even if you're looking to do it in-house, it's worth at least to get external help to ensure that you've done your discovery and classification correctly, because that will bring a lot of problems if it hasn't been done properly.
Thanks, Peter. We'll come on to that in a minute. We're going to hold that thought a second. But there's some good insights there, but I think there's lots of reasons why it's a good idea to just think of some particular examples of criticality or things that relate to infrastructure that would need some additional expert support. So hold that thought. Because going forward, I think one of the things that we wanted to try and understand is really, how do I turn this into a blueprint? So you saw my previous process where I just sort of typical example of what people go through, but what does that translate to into a multi-step thinking set of considerations? And I think this is a good way of just highlighting this to you, which is first, understand your licensing risk. You need to go and do that discovery. Peter mentioned that's very critical up front. Then really understand how much of that is actually in use. So you can actually run an install list and you can find out that actually Java is installed everywhere. But then when you look and find out, actually, there's a percentage of that that's actually fairly redundant, or it's duplicative or something like that. So you probably need a bit more intelligence around that just to understand what's in use. And the reason why is so you can understand, how to manage that, right? Then you need to understand if you're at risk of an audit. Well, if you're already paying Oracle and you've been very good and you're continuing to pay, the chances of an audit are pretty slim, as long as you're supplying reasonable amounts of data. If you've been using Oracle Java and you've not been paying Oracle, you're actually much more in a very tricky situation, because that's where you start getting the sales calls. And when you start getting the sales calls, they're fairly relentless. But it's important at that point that you've got a good Java inventory. You understand what you have, and maybe don't provide that information initially to Oracle, particularly if you're thinking about moving away from Oracle Java and looking at alternative. As Peter mentioned, skills is key, right? Many people think, oh, I've got a few Java developers, that's enough, we can do the migration. Maybe, but you probably need somebody that has done this before, can give you some ideas of the best practice, even if they're just helping you with the project framework, because ultimately that will help with the decision making. Because for you to build the ROI and you to understand the pros and cons of migrating, you need to sort of understand the overall cost framework, and it can be extremely compelling, as we'll show you in a minute, of weighing up the decision making around that. But other things to consider in that process are things like, what are my licensing savings? What support coverage do I need? Do I need coverage for my Java 6 and 7 and 8 applications? What is my security readiness? How often do I get security patches? If you went with a free OpenJDK solution, as you'll hear in a minute, you don't get the security patches as frequently. So if you have a vulnerability and you have a potential exposure event, then you have to wait until those security patches have been built. It could be many weeks, and you've got security risk and exposure and general lack of compliance during that process. So plenty of things to consider, but I think this is a really good five-step process to a blueprint. And before we just move on a little bit, one other thing I wanted to talk about is just selecting a JDK alternative is not just about cost. Think about the emphasis on security. And there's 6 important points here. So firstly, paid Java JDK solutions versus free ones, right? They give you critical patch updates, which we'll come on to what that means in a second, but it means that you're reducing the time to almost nothing between a known vulnerability and an exploit that you can patch. Second thing, expertise. Absolutely, Peter just mentioned that. Third thing is an understanding of the industry regulatory compliance you're in. It's often the case where developer teams make decisions, and that could have a severe impact on the organization. For instance, if it's an organization that has PCI compliance or banking compliance, or you're in critical infrastructure, or you have GDPR requirements in Europe, for example, which has provisions around private information and the management of that, which requires support and security, that you could be out of compliance if you don't actually have the right security and the right updates. Critical response, working with somebody that can be there for you when you need it, right? Versus no support, which means you're running around trying to do it yourself. And then for more specific things like security relay CVE, vulnerability assessment, having that capability within a support framework, as well as some incident response that you might need in the case of a particular exposure situation. So with that, let's just talk a little bit about what we mean by security. And I think I'm going to ask Peter again to come into this. So first of all, let me give you a perspective on here. So every time a version of Java is released, typically by Oracle, that's called a patch set update. It's a major release, right? And within those major releases, there are a bunch of fixes. It's usually big releases, like 300 plus changes. But they also include all of the security updates and known vulnerabilities. So when that's published, so is the model around the exploits that are available within those versions. So guess what? It takes usually bad actors about 48 hours before they realize that can be exploited. And then before you know it, there's a methodology available for download where somebody can take advantage of that exploit that's sitting in that version of Java. So why is that important? Because it takes time for open source community to patch that update. So if you're not working with a JDK vendor that gives you immediate fixes, you can have a massive period of time, never mind the amount of time it takes you to regression test and remediate that before you can fix. So this is often a misconception around Java, which is when you make decisions about licensing, if you don't have the right support framework around the vendor you're choosing, you could actually place a huge burden on either your DevOps team or the security compliance risk in the organization. Now, Peter, I don't know whether you have a particular thought around this, but I know this is a very common sort of issue in the industry anyway, which is like, why would you even need support on Java? And most of the time, it's like insurance. People say, I don't need insurance, and all of a sudden they crash their car and they realize that they did need insurance. So I don't know if you have a perspective on that, Peter.
I do, and people who know me well know that I'm obsessed with security. And when people ask me the question, why pay for Java, as well as for other systems, I always tell them it's security and reliability. Cybersecurity breaches are getting harder and harder and more sophisticated, and with the growth in AI, they're only going to get harder to deal with. And if you don't have stable releases and you've got downtime as a result of a regression, the time that it will take to get a fix, you're losing money. The repercussions for your organizations are severe. And same with security. With every so often we see ransomware attacks and big payouts happening. It all comes down to lack of advanced security settings, and the problem gets even more difficult in the cloud, because the cloud offers very unique advantages in terms of security, but also it's very easy to misconfigure it and open doors. So the big difference here is really when you look at it from a Java perspective, it more than pays off to have paid versions of Java in order to get the stable security releases, and also stable releases overall that don't cause regressions. And in our experience, there are only 2 vendors who really offer this, and that is Oracle and Azure. no one else offers the same security releases that are so critical for the core applications that you're running.
Thank you, Peter, for the plug there. But more importantly, just in the interest of time, and I know we won't be able to get through everything today, but I do see a question that's popped up into the chat as well. If we start to think about how then people move and how people think about assessing what's involved in the migration and the options, Peter, this is what you do with your business all the time. It'd be great to just understand quickly how you would take someone through a process here and what that would look like, particularly maybe some of the options out there as well.
Absolutely. So a lot of people, when we start talking to people, we tend to start with the business case. What are the objectives of the organization? The sort of the near term and the longer term. Maybe they are already undergoing a transformation and moving to cloud and optimizing operations. But it all starts with really what I already talked about earlier. It really starts with having proper documentation and visibility across your IT assets. And we can help with that as well. If you're working with an external partner, it's worth considering capabilities, and also there are tools. For example, we have built our own automation to discover infrastructure assets across layers, from the infrastructure down to the up to the application. It's really important to have this visibility and to classify everything, and really discover in the context of Java. Java tends to hide in many places. As I said, it's often bundled with applications, and especially in organizations where there's a lot of turnover of people. We see time and time again, it's quite common in financial services, but also in other sectors, where people come into a role and they have no idea what part of the infrastructure, part of the coding does, because previous people have not documented it. It's a big challenge, and it spills over into migration projects, because whether you are delivering it internally or you're working with an external migration consultancy, it will take time and effort, and time and effort means cost. So the more you can do internally to document and help with the discovery, the easier the migration, the more cost effective it will be, and the faster it will be. When looking at resources, we also find quite often that organizations are underestimating the migration effort and the complexity. There's a reason why migrations, especially with big name consultancies, tend to be a very high cost. And that's because of mainly two reasons. Firstly, the complexity of the infrastructure, complexity of what needs to be achieved from the current state to the desired state. And secondly, the skills. Because of the complexity, it requires very specific skill sets. And there's a huge talent shortage with that skill set and experience. Yeah, so it really it comes down to planning correctly, assessing your assets, and I strongly advise getting some external help, even if you're considering performing and delivering within your own organization. At least get some external help to validate the process and validate the discovery and classification.
Got it. Thank you, Peter. And of course, sizing and thought process around what this looks like as we all trying to bring this together in terms of an ROI is an important area. So understanding desktops, the infrastructures, the critical and non-critical applications, where you have Java and number of versions that you have, things like this are just as important. And the reason why I say that is because I often, when anybody says to me, what should I do? Or with that power of three model, what should I get from that combination? The best thing to do is try and get some idea of a t-shirt size of what it's going to take to move you from where you are to where you'd like to be, and the savings that are associated with that. And it's not difficult. This is a process that comes out of that advisory Peter was talking about, just a discovery and understanding, and just getting a general feel for what the migration looks like. And these typical examples just show you, like, for instance, what Oracle would charge, what typical alternate cost charges are, which is significantly less. Migrations could be very short, just a few weeks, okay? And you're saving 75% or more, right, over multiple years compared to what you would be just staying. And the same goes for if you're a bigger organization. Usually, the bigger the organization, the bigger the savings. And here you're getting above 80%, versus what you would typically be doing if you just stayed and surrendered, which is sort of where the point I was trying to make earlier. So more detail on this, to work with us or other companies as well to give you a perspective. But this is really important because this helps you get to that decision making much more quickly. Because if you don't do this, you don't understand that the effort is really small and really quick to do the migration. You don't build that into the overall consciousness around what is the right SAM ITAM outcome from the licensing conversation. And finally, the last point to just finish up on this is just the start. So when you're working with the right JDK vendor and the right specialist, kickstarting a migration into a different type of Java model gives it a lot more benefits around the life cycle and what you can do over time. And that doesn't stop, right? I mean, working with Oracle, for example, is just one aspect of Java. But if you work with other specialists and other JDKs, you're going to find that there's a wealth of other expertise out there, from understanding how to make developer teams more efficient, clean up their code, analyze what's being used and not used, and detect vulnerabilities in Java and get rid of those known vulnerabilities, improve your overall posture of security. There are many tool sets, including the ones that we have at Azul, that provide all of this in addition to just moving from our Oracle JDK to something as an alternative. So with that, let me just quickly summarize before we just take any additional questions. Bit of an idea about Azul. So Azul is one of those alternative OpenJDKs. Obviously, we're, as Peter mentioned, the most equivalent to Oracle. We provide the most support for all our older versions of legacy Java, and obviously provide those critical Java support updates. But we're an easy swap from Oracle. It's almost a configuration, let's just say, of how your Java application is running to move from Oracle to Azul. And obviously, we have many customers that use our technology as well. 50% of the top 10 world's most valuable brands and nearly 40% of the Fortune 100 so have already made that switch because they've realized the value of moving away just from a traditional Oracle model. Peter, what about, can you just give me a bit of perspective on Smart Migrator?
So Smart Migrator is a startup. We have a global team of senior cloud migration architects and DevSecOps engineers. Basically, we have a strong team that has the majority of which have formerly been amongst the most senior architects and DevOps across some of the leading migration consultancies. A lot of experience. Most of our guys between 8 and 18 years of experience. A few were migrating data centers and consolidating data centers from before cloud existed. And our core expertise is around automation. So even though we are a professional service provider, our core mission is to create a platform that automates the process of migrating, optimizing, and ongoing management of the cloud, and really tackle a lot of the barriers that thousands of organizations are facing around complexity, around the talent shortage, and the high cost involved. So as a partner, we cover as capabilities the whole spectrum of cloud needs for Java and beyond. And are able to assist in the transformation of organizations to cloud and across hybrid cloud, and really look at as a sort of how do we help you get the most out of your transformation. So in the context of Java, for example, we're talking about the switch from Oracle Java to an OpenJDK and the reasons for it. But in the context of Azul, for example, Azul has multiple options. It has high performance options for Java applications running in the cloud. And those tackle a lot of challenges and bring a lot of benefits, and will be more than happy to talk to you, and I'm sure Simon too, if about how using an organization like Azul, we can help you transform your Java applications in the cloud and reduce your costs further and improve the productivity of applications. So overall, we partner with organizations to help them ease their journey to cloud and beyond, and get the maximum value out of cloud. But our core focus is on automation, and we've built some substantial automation already and continue doing so.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, so we're near at the end now. Just a couple of things I just want to make everyone aware of. So coming soon is a new ITAM Java licensing ebook that sort of follows some of the thought process that we went through today on this webinar. That's coming in about a couple of weeks. So anybody that signed up for this webinar, we're getting a link to a copy of that when it comes out in a couple of weeks' time. And then just because we're out of time, any other questions that anybody has, please feel free to email partners@azul.com with those questions. And I think one last question, somebody says, well, we'll be providing a link to rewatch the webinar. Absolutely, we will. So you can watch it at your heart's content for as many times as you like in your own time. So I appreciate the question as well. But yes, we will share this as well. And with that, I just want to say thank you very much, Peter, for your time today, and also for everybody joining. And we'll catch you again on another webinar soon. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, everyone, and thanks, Simon.